Welcome back to the Resilient Kitchen video series. This series was motivated by my experience living through Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina in 2024. And its goal is to provide science-backed, simple, inexpensive suggestions to help everyday people prepare their kitchens for a storm or other event which may compromise electricity, water, cell service, and road access. This is the third video in the series and is focused on keeping your refrigerator and freezer cold as long as possible without power from the electric grid, including strategies if you have an electric generator. So after a storm that takes out electric power is perhaps the point in time that we most appreciate this box in our kitchen that we typically take for granted: humans' ability to control cold, which thermodynamically is a wild thing. The cold food chain is critical to our whole food system, and to disturb this in your home can have huge impacts. The amount of food that was lost in our community after Hurricane Helene was significant, and so proactive steps we can take to avoid this loss is a big help. Most of the tips here are for situations like hurricanes when you have a day or two of advance notice of possible disrupted electricity. I've summarized to-do and shopping lists to help prioritize these critical pre-storm hours, including the freezer strategies discussed in this video. One quick note about freezer preparation and really this whole video series is that there's a wide range of possible storms or emergencies. And so the importance of the contents in this video really depends on if you're preparing for a hurricane in the summertime or a blizzard in the middle of winter. Coincidentally, as I'm recording this, I'm preparing for an ice storm, and so freezer preparation is not at the top of my list because it's going to be basically a freezer outside. If we lose power, I'm probably not going to turn on my generator to keep it going. I'll just box up the important things in a safe container and put it outside. So that's why I divided these videos into separate modules so that whatever seems to be the most important thing that you should be dealing with for this storm is the ones you can listen to. First, when you learn of an incoming storm, turn your cold storage devices, any refrigerators or freezers, down as low as they will go. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, recommends typically keeping your refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 14 degrees Celsius and your freezer at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 18 degrees Celsius to keep food safe. But cranking those down as low as they'll go before a storm can buy you some additional time if you lose power. Secondly, pull out any items you intend to eat in the days during and after the storm and place them in an ice chest. If you lose power, the goal is to not open your refrigerator or freezer at all to extend the time it remains below a safe temperature. Your ice chest will be where your post-storm food will be stored. Okay, now take a survey of the items that are left. The most resilient freezer will hypothetically be filled with one solid chunk of ice that fills the entire volume. So your goal will be to model this as closely as possible with a Tetris-like matrix of large frozen chunks of ice. To make room for these large chunks of ice, consider removing less dense items that you may be storing in the freezer that are not that great at maintaining frozen temperatures, such as bread, coffee beans, bags of frozen vegetables. So you can replace that volume with a chunk of resilient solid ice. If you lose power and your freezer begins to warm, once your freezer gets to the melting point temperature, 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius, any frozen parts will begin to melt. Having large chunks of frozen water allows you to take advantage of the phase change of solid water back to liquid, or what's called the latent heat of fusion, to absorb that heat and keep the freezer at a constant temperature. Ice cubes are not a great option for long-term freezer resilience because a bag of ice is not as dense as that same volume occupied by a solid chunk of ice. There's a lot of air trapped between the cubes, and then each cube is exposed to the warming freezer temperatures and will melt quickly. Instead, freeze big vessels for a more resilient refrigerator, freezer, and ice chest. The problem with this theory is that it takes a long time, like days, to freeze multiple large chunks of ice if you're starting with tap water. I have a trick to speed this up. You can rely on store-bought ice bags to kickstart the process. Fill a tub or other large watertight container with ice, and then add tap water to provide the connective water between the cubes. Now you're starting the freezing process with a bin that's filled with water already at the freezing point temperature, not at the warmer tap water temperature, and is more than half frozen already because of the ice cubes. Think creatively about these containers. This is a short-term need. You likely have plastic storage tubs that can be temporarily emptied and can resume their normal storage role after the storm. No need to buy anything new. Even milk jugs and food storage containers, or even Ziploc bags can be a great option. They even make these jumbo 2.5-gallon Ziploc bags. When choosing a container, make sure that it is leak proof, because remember, if you're without power for an extended period and don't have an electric generator, eventually the stored ice will become water. Choosing vessels that will contain that water to avoid a leaky mess is a great idea. If using bags, double or triple bagging is a great insurance policy. If you, like me, don't have room in your freezer for these large blocks of ice, you can use your already frozen food that's in your freezer as the starting place for these bins. Put these already frozen food blocks in watertight storage bags, such as vacuum sealers or even new freezer Ziploc bags. Place these in your large tubs. Fill in any gaps with ice cubes, and then fill in the rest with tap water. These items are now part of the solution, and you've made them even more resilient against defrosting by combining them in one solid ice mass rather than keeping them as individual cubes. This is especially important if there's certain items in your freezer that are especially critical to keep at a safe frozen temperature, such as certain temperature-sensitive medications, stored breast milk, or especially pricey meats and fish. The challenge with this theory is how to break them free of this solid mass after the storm. Once life returns to normal and you have reliable electricity, remove the block from the freezer and let them sit in your sink for 1 to 4 hours depending on the size of the block. Make sure they don't defrost, but start to destabilize. Then you're able, with a bit of force, to break them apart and separate those individual fruit items, which will still be frozen, to put back in the freezer for long-term storage. If you have a large enough electric generator and can run an extension cord to your refrigerator, I would suggest purchasing some of these remote digital thermometers for your hurricane prep kit. I found these for about $2 a piece, or remote meat thermometers work really well too. Before the storm, attach these to various items in the refrigerator and freezer and label each one of them. You can even embed some of these in those solid chunks of ice. These will now indicate for you when to turn on your generator without having to open the door. This would have been a huge help for us because we had to keep opening the door of our freezer to monitor the temperature to indicate when to turn the generator on. And every time we opened the door, we introduced a glug of warm room air into our freezer. Remember to only run generators outdoors in a well-ventilated area and away from any open windows. Okay, one more quick hack as a low-tech temperature logger for your freezer. And this is useful to help track the safety of your food in your freezer for a known power outage or for a power outage that might happen when you're on vacation. Freeze a container of ice and place a coin on top of it and leave it in your freezer. If you open the freezer and the coin is still on top, the contents have been frozen since you placed the container in the freezer. Great. But if the coin's at the bottom, either under liquid water or ice water, your freezer likely lost power long enough for the contents of your freezer to have thawed at some point. The coin sunk to the bottom in the liquid water, and so it's probably best to discard the contents to be safe. I hope these ideas help to give you strategies to extend the life of your refrigerator and freezer during a power outage. Please visit this website via this QR code or the link in the description to have access to other videos in the series and a checklist of items to purchase and to do before the storm. Also, share this video with friends and neighbors if you found it helpful. I hope you'll continue to follow along as we develop more resilient kitchen strategies. Helpful comments are always welcome. Thank you.